Hello, and welcome to the weekend episode of Views of an Outsider, Parenting Our Children, Parenting Ourselves, Part 11, The Rest of Resilience. This week, we are wrapping up the final chapter of our current series, which is based on the idea of taking the principles that would allow someone to parent a child well, and then trying to use those same principles to successfully reparent ourselves. Regardless of whether you were someone who was lucky enough to have great parents, or as someone who unfortunately had parents who were not so great, one thing is for certain. No one had parents who were perfect. So to varying degrees, we all require a bit of a do-over in order to help us let go of any unhelpful baggage that is continuing to weigh us down and hold us back. That way we can be free to rise as high as we possibly can as we attempt to build lives for ourselves that are full of the very best experiences that we can possibly manage to soak up during our brief window of time here. There are a lot of people out in the world these days who are selling one version or another of self-help, but hardly any of them agree when it comes to the advice that they offer the rest of the world. So how does someone go about deciding whose advice to trust enough to actually act on it? Out of all of the experts that are available to choose from, I personally think that Jordan Peterson is the one that it makes the most sense to listen to. As a world-renowned psychologist, he's highly trained and qualified. He has also actually walked the walk and successfully raised 2 kids of his own who have not only thrived in their own lives, but they still continue to have voluntary, healthy relationships with their parents now that they are adults, which is basically the entire end goal of parenting and an outcome that practically every parent hopes to achieve for themselves. Even though with 1 out of every 4 young people going completely no contact with their parents these days, it seems like fewer and fewer people are actually succeeding on that front in today's modern world. But to top all of that off, Jordan's advice also has a proven track record. It has worked for thousands of people who have actually tried it, including his children who are now successfully raising his 6 grandchildren, while also running thriving business ventures of their own. With a resume that boasts all of those selling points, you really couldn't ask for much more when you're trying to decide who to trust. And that is where Jordan's new parenting series comes into play. I found it both fascinating and extremely practical, which is kind of Jordan's forte in life. And even though the advice that he offers in his latest series is tailored specifically for parents and soon-to-be parents, perhaps there are also some insights that we might glean from these straightforward lessons that will enable the rest of us to discover the best way to set about reparenting ourselves. In the first week of this series, we took a look at the roles that parents play in their children's lives. We considered what the spirit of the mother brings to her child's world and what the spirit of the father brings as well. We also looked at the perspectives that they should each try to incorporate into their roles, and we considered some of the pitfalls that both parents can avoid if they are each properly prepared ahead of time so that they can watch out for them. Then we took all of that useful information and we applied it to the idea of raising ourselves to be the type of people that we each actually aspire to be. Over the next 2 weeks, we zoomed in on toddlerhood. We looked at this magical time at the start of our journey in this world and at the common misbehaviors that often come along for the ride. We took in both the positive aspects and the negative ones about this brief window in a child's life, and we discussed the best ways to maximize all of the potential in this goldmine phase of human development in order to successfully set your child up for a productive and happy future. Then once again, we took all of that information and we applied it to the idea of helping ourselves to mature beyond our own starting point in life so that we too could grow to be the kind of people that we most admire. After that, we jumped ahead in the journey of childhood to another turbulent phase in the development of young people, and we spent 2 more weeks focusing in on adolescence. We discussed exactly why it is that the decision to spoil a child leads to them having a lack of independence, and why that is such a devastating fate to inflict on a fellow human being. So right out of the gate, we had to recognize the fundamental reality that the key to unlocking an enriching life that a young person can actually thrive in is to successfully teach them responsibility, because there comes a time in every child's life when they realize that they are standing on the precipice of adulthood, and naturally that transition is both exciting, confusing, and scary all at the same time. And each of those emotions are bound to generate a lot of questions. So it is hardly surprising that adolescence is a time when newly fledged teens begin to brim with thoughts about things like identity, autonomy, and meaning. And it is during this important window of time that learning responsibility becomes crucial, both as a way of answering the big questions of life and in order to lay the foundations for a future in which young adults will be able to flourish. Finally, we took this framework for thriving and we applied as much of it as possible to ourselves so that we too can survive the rough times of transition in our lives and emerge on the other side of them as more capable human beings. Then we brought some of Jonathan Haidt's work into the mix so that we could discuss what the digital age is doing to childhood and to adolescence. We looked at what the virtual world has added to young lives, including the things that are not good for healthy human development. And even more importantly, we looked at the vital things that are being eliminated from young people's early experiences due to the total eclipse that is being created by our new life that is so completely filled up with tiny screens. First, we focused in on girls and the unbelievably harmful effects that social media is having on their lives. We covered the truly dramatic rise of mental health issues, the spike in the number of cases involving self-harm, the uptick in eating disorders, and the tendency of social media to exacerbate the feminine version of antisocial behavior, which is training young girls to be the very worst versions of themselves through the near constant reinforcement of a very negative part of the online world. The following week, we considered the ever-widening divide that exists between young men and young women right now, as well as all of the unhappiness that this chasm is creating for both groups. Then we zoomed in on boys, and we took a long, hard look at what the digital age has done to them. Even though the early life of boys is less symptomatic than the lives of the girls their age, by the time that both groups are fully fledged adults, those positions have completely flipped. So we took an unflinchingly honest look at the outcomes of a life that is built on online gaming, the optimization of short-term attention spans, and the digital hijacking of reality, only to offer the hollow substitute of unsatisfying fantasies in its place. Then we considered the damage that is being done to young men through their early exposure to graphic online pornography and the emptiness that occurs in a life that has only virtual outlets for energies and ambitions that were meant to be poured into tangible and meaningful achievements out in the real world. And finally, we wrapped up by looking at what parents can do and how they can give their children the things that they need in order to avoid the downsides of our modern fate, including how parents can ensure that their kids still get the important nutrients that come out of experiencing a real childhood, so that they will have the foundations that they need in order to thrive throughout the rest of their lives. After that, we returned to Jordan's parenting series, where we took a look at a few of the hazards of adolescence, namely bullying and peer pressure. Every teenager is going to fall prey to both of these experiences from time to time. They are a part of life that is completely unavoidable, because teenagers are understandably desperate to fit in with their peers. When we think back to our own time during those turbulent years of adolescent transition, we too were obviously desperate to have friends, as well as to avoid being singled out and ending up as the target of exclusion and bullying. So we focused on bullying first, and we quickly realized that this was one experience that every child eventually goes through, and since it can't actually be avoided by anyone, we considered the best strategies for helping your child deal with it and recover from it successfully. We also did our best to figure out when a parent should intervene and when they should not. Then last week, we turned our attention to peer pressure, and we quickly realized that this was another unpleasant reality that simply cannot be avoided. Every parent wants their child to be popular and to have friends so that they will be happy, but no parent wants their child to be susceptible to peer pressure. Unfortunately, life doesn't work that way. Peer pressure is the dark shadow that lurks beneath friendship. You can't have one without the other. So we focused on the ways that parents can help their children develop a higher perspective that will allow them to evaluate their friendships and determine which ones are worth investing in and which ones will only drag them down because those people don't actually have their best interests at heart. We also learned that helping a child create a vision for their future serves as a great counterweight to peer pressure. This deters adolescents from being too quick to let their friends lead them down a path that might eliminate their own envisioned future from the realm of possibilities for their life. And as always, we took all of these useful lessons and we applied them directly to ourselves. Then last week, we started to dive into our final parenting topic, which is teaching young people and ourselves how to be resilient in the face of true hardship in life. And I will admit that this was the lesson that I've been waiting for, because this one is a very, very personal subject for me and one that is near to my heart. I live with very serious degenerative health issues, and I have ever since I was 3 years old. I've had 25 surgeries so far, and I've led a very small life that has not included many of the simple things that I wanted most out of it. To this day, I continue to lose more and more of the already limited number of things that I have left, and that only makes each loss seem bigger and harder to accept. I have also watched the people that I loved most in this world die, slowly, and I couldn't stop any of it from happening, try as I might. I have fought against the harshest realities of life with everything that I have in me, and still lost. I have felt my world irrevocably end with the final heartbeat of the people that I loved the most, and I put their bodies into coffins under the ground. Then I went home to face the long and terrible emptiness alone. And the thing about living with several degenerative conditions is that it means that I am never done enduring more losses. The worst isn't behind me, and I can't even comfort myself with that reassuring lie. Whatever happens to me next, I will have to face it, however unbearable it may be. And now I'll have to do that without the people that I relied on the most to be there with me in my corner so that they could at least face it with me. And yet, here I am. I'm pursuing the sense of purpose that is still available for me, and I'm trying my very best to contribute something positive to this world, however small that contribution may be. So yes, damn it, if there is one thing that I am, it is resilient. If I can claim even one true virtue for myself, it is that one. So what does it actually mean to be resilient? It means that you are able to tolerate the inevitable ups and downs of life. It means that you are human, and of course you struggle with things that are hard, just like everyone else does. But you are somehow able to bounce back in the face of true adversity and to climb to your feet once more, no matter how bruised and bloodied you may be. Tragedy comes to everyone. That doesn't mean that all tragedies are the same or that they are all equal, but all true tragedies are hard, and they are all painful. We may not all be in the same boat, but we are all trying to survive the same ocean. And it is entirely possible, not to mention necessary, to help your children optimize their capacity for exhibiting resilience in the face of life's storms. After all, no one can have everything in their life go well for them. So it is important to realize that it is also just as possible and just as necessary to help yourself optimize your own capacity for having resilience in the face of life's battering rams, because they will come for you eventually. And being completely unarmed against them won't change that. There were 4 lessons that were discussed in this particular episode of Jordan's parenting series, and it might be advantageous to go over them again before we really get started today. Lesson 1 is to teach your children to aim up. Lesson 2 is to stop answering questions that your children aren't asking you. Lesson 3 is to not lose yourself in your parenting. And lesson 4 is that there is no problem that you cannot confront. In this episode, a young couple came to Jordan to seek his advice about how to face a very serious problem that life has unfortunately decided to throw their way. Theirs is a beautiful young family with 3 small children, a 1-year-old, a 2.5-year-old, and a 4-year-old. But 3 weeks before this episode was filmed, their 4-year-old son was diagnosed with CMT, a rare neurological condition that is degenerative. So his condition is going to continue to progress throughout his childhood and indeed throughout the rest of his life. He may lose the ability to use his feet and legs, maybe even his arms and hands. Needless to say, a diagnosis like that is not an easy thing for any parent to hear regarding their child. And unfortunately, both this child and his parents are probably going to get a lot of opportunities that they never actually wanted to have to expand their capacity for being resilient. We covered the first 2 lessons on resilience last week, and this week we are going to take on the final 2 lessons of this series. So lesson 3 is, don't lose yourself in your parenting. Now, why exactly do you need to be careful not to lose yourself in the responsibilities of your parenting role? Because you are going to have a life beyond your children one day. And if you don't, then as Jordan pointed out, woe to your children. Because that means that they will have been stripped of their right to experience a life of their own as a result of your having become too dependent on the meaning that they brought to your own life to see them as more than an extension of you. There is another reason that you also don't want to lose yourself in your parenting, and that is because you want to be an effective and valuable spouse to your partner. And in order to do that, you have to keep your marriage intact. Actually, you need to make sure that your marriage not only stays intact, but that it thrives, not least of all for the sake of your children. Your children actually need to see you successfully engaged in adult affairs because they need to learn how to go about being successful adults. After all, they are going to spend the majority of their life as adults, not as children. In our own journey of self-improvement, it is also important for us not to lose ourselves to plans and our human tendency to be rigid in our pursuit of optimization. Take life seriously, yes, because the things you do today will determine how prepared tomorrow's version of you is to confront whatever comes. But you don't want to forget to live today as well, because you can only live in the present, not in the past or in the future. No one wants to end up being the person that Henry David Thoreau described by saying, when it comes time to die, let us not discover that we have never lived. Now, a lot of people might be tempted to argue that childhood is more important than adulthood is. But as Jordan pointed out, childhood is important because it is a time of preparation for adulthood. Don't lose sight of the purpose of childhood or of its goal. Children need to be able to see that adulthood is valuable and that it has a direct relationship to the childhood that they are currently living through. After all, they are going to become adults, like it or not. So it would be great if they could learn to value the thing that they are going to become. As Jordan pointed out, this is the lesson that was taught in the story of Peter Pan. Not valuing adulthood is the problem that trapped Peter Pan in an eternal childhood. He wants to remain a child forever. He never learned to value adulthood because he only had role models like Captain Hook around him, who was an absolute tyrant. So his solution was to never grow up at all. Is anybody else seeing parallels between that story and what has been going on for the last few years in our own society? If you are the parent of a child who has chronic health problems, then to some degree, you'll have to develop the capacity to compartmentalize your life. And you'll also have to be deliberate about making sure that you leave time for you and your spouse to maintain the relationship that is so vital between the two of you. It is extremely common in families where a child dies for the parents to end up getting divorced. That cataclysmic tragedy is often just too much for the marriage to survive. Their relationship shatters. So it is important for every couple, but especially for those couples who are under additional strain, to be extra attentive to how necessary it is to carefully shepherd the limited amount of time that they have to really be together. It's always tricky for any parent to try to prioritize their time together when they have little children. But being careful to maintain that priority anyway fortifies your relationship and keeps it strong. And a strong relationship between their parents is a gift that is beyond valuable to your kids. You'll have to be extra careful to prioritize that foundational relationship if your child has chronic health problems, because it could easily fall by the wayside, and that would be a very bad thing. Chronic issues are a problem that requires a long haul. Likewise, you should prioritize the relationships in your own life, including your relationship with yourself. You need to make time to maintain and invest in those relationships if you want them to survive the pressures that you will face in life. At this point, Jordan asked this young couple what had happened to the relationship between the two of them since their son's diagnosis. And the mother was very open in her response, saying that she had come to rely heavily on her husband for many of the qualities that he possesses. She noted that she didn't like for him to be away from her more than was absolutely necessary in order for him to do his job, adding, "His presence, his insight, his talents, his skills are crucial, are mission crucial to me right now. I actually was talking to a friend and really applauding myself for deciding to marry him 12 years ago. I was like, I knew this would pay off because he is exactly the man that our family and our children need." And that willingness to rely on each other has only seemed to strengthen this particular marriage because her husband feels needed and valued by his wife, which is the key to a man's sense of self-worth. Of course, this can be taken too far, and then it quickly reaches a suffocating and unhealthy place. But we often tend to rob ourselves of a huge chunk of the resources that we were meant to draw on, based on this idea that we must be completely self-contained in order to prove something. It is okay to need people. While there are plenty of cases where one tragedy tends to produce another, it is also possible, if you are confronted with an existential challenge, to be fortunate enough to find a path that allows you to deepen your bond and your love for each other. And that is what everyone would hope for in a situation like this. Jordan had seen this very miracle happen before, saying, "I saw this, for example, when my wife's mother died. She died of a degenerative neurological disease, and it took her like 15 years. Frontal temporal dementia. And her husband stepped in, man. He was kind of a man about town, a party animal, hyper extroverted, a real character. And you wouldn't have thought that his maternal touch was one of his stronger features. But when he started to lose her, man, he just stepped up to the plate. And it was something to see. And that fortified his relationship with his children. And then they all pulled together more as she passed from view. And so their relationships deepened. And that kind of filled the gap, you know? And so you never know what resources you have to draw on when something that isn't what you wished for comes your way. This is so true. And another truth that may seem a little harsh is, woe to the person who hasn't cultivated any meaningful relationships like that in their life when their day of tragedy comes. Because your odds of surviving it alone go down significantly. That is just the reality of being a member of one of the most social species on the entire planet. So it is wise to realize as soon as possible in this world that we need each other. And tragedy can help you know that you are necessary to your partner in their life. You also realize why you're necessary to your children. You know why your spouse is necessary to you. You know that both of you together are crucial in order to shoulder the challenges that lie in front of you. And you know that you've got something important to do. In some ways, that is better than getting the perfect vision that you think you want out of your life. The crystallizing effects of being given the clarity that comes out of a crisis can be a gift that makes your world so much more vibrant. And that's the very thing that a lot of people desperately want deep down if they have any sense and have really thought about life. But like all things that are truly valuable, there is a price to pay before you get them. The only valuable thing that is free in this life is Jesus. So to sum up this lesson, what is the routine that adults need to adopt in order to keep their marriage functional, not only for them as a unit, but also for each of them as individuals, and finally as the platform on which their children stand? Jordan advised parents to spend an hour and a half each week communicating with their spouse about the details of their domestic economy. That is around 15 minutes every day. You should spend this time discussing how the kids are doing, how your relationship is doing, what household issues need to be assessed and addressed, along with practical issues like how things are going for you financially. Think of this essentially like a business meeting. In a family, the business is the kids, the marriage, the relationships, and the household. Taking that time to cover those practical issues keeps things straight from a management point of view. It allows you to stay on top of things as they arise. Taking this time to routinely assess and address the practical issues of your own life can be helpful as well in keeping yourself on track. But as parents, you also need to carve out 2 evenings a week or 2 times a week where you can be together as a couple. Because, as Jordan pointed out, you need some romance along with your adventure. That keeps the adventure going, and it keeps the marriage stable. And that's really good for the kids. You need to take time away from the kids so that your marriage optimizes, because that's the best thing you can do for your kids in the long run, as well as for you and for your partner and community and the world for that matter. Lesson 4 is, there is no problem that you cannot confront. It is strange to discover that there is a certain liberation to be found in finally facing your worst fears. In the case of this mother, she has always felt uncomfortable doing things differently from the way that everyone else was raising their children, even when she felt that what she instinctively wanted to do was a better fit for her kids. So there has been a liberating side to receiving this diagnosis, because now it is obvious that she is going to have to adapt how they do things in their family because their son has special needs that have to be considered. And now she feels emboldened to do exactly what he needs her to do without comparing her gut instincts to the things that the parents around her are doing when it comes to their own children. Her husband has also had his own revelations as well. They have obviously faced challenges before, but nothing like this. He very much wants to be a source of strength for his family, but he has also come to realize that it is important to him that he be a source of light for his family as they travel down what could at times be a really dark and dreary path. And that path may grow even darker if his son's condition continues to deteriorate into a more debilitating form of this disease, which sadly is the current prediction for him. But Jordan believes that it is possible to grow stronger in direct proportion to the size of your own trials, and so do I. In those times, it is often a motivational force to realize that there is more to you as a person, as a mother or father, as a wife or husband, than you might have suspected. There is more depth to you. There is more depth to your family, and there is more depth to the world than most people know. And with the right source of fuel, sometimes that depth is inexhaustible. One of the things that was very interesting in this episode was an experiment that Jordan described using two groups of people as test subjects and ensuring that there was only one difference between the two groups. So you take two groups of people and you subject both of them to a stress. And then you measure their stress hormone responses. The only difference between the two groups that are being tested is that one group gets the stress imposed on them externally, and the other group does the same thing but voluntarily. And oddly enough, the physiochemical responses between the two groups are completely different from each other. The group that takes the stress on as a voluntary challenge does not even produce the same neurochemicals as the group that has the stress imposed on them. Also, different parts of their brain are activated in each group. Jordan says that it looks like these differences might cascade all the way down to the cellular level and even into the DNA. If that is true, and you take on something stressful as a challenge rather than as a burden, new genes in your DNA would code for new proteins that would help produce a new version of you. And that description of a new you would be true on every level of your being. And that new you would be reflected from your cellular DNA up. And there is reason to believe that this is actually how things work. So resilience can be built into you if you approach it correctly. You see glimmers of having this human wiring to overcome challenges in even the youngest human beings. This father already sees its presence in the playtime that he engages in with his 3 toddlers. He noted, "It's almost intrinsic that they want to have some kind of hero-villain story arc. I play the villain every time. And inevitably, in that story time, there is a moment where I say something to the effect of, 'I'm too strong for you, you can't beat me.' And then they just light up and they attack. And I kind of see it as a moment where we are intrinsically putting it into each other's head that we can confront anything. It's the greatest. And for me, as much as them. Like, I find myself resonating with it on a level that they enjoy just as much. So it's very mutually beneficial. Encouraging one another to believe that you can confront any challenge, no matter how overwhelming it may be, is a good worldview to practice and to act out with your children. Jordan agreed, saying, "One of the gifts my father gave me, and I talked to him a little bit about this, he helped instill in me the belief that there was no problem I couldn't solve if I confronted it. That's a great thing to have. That's like a spine of steel, if you believe that. You're playing that out with your kids in dramatic play. I bet they love that. People think competitive play is oppressive because someone has to lose. It's like, no, you're practicing losing. Why? So that you can transcend your fragility and so that you can maintain yourself in the face of temporary disappointment as you move towards ultimate victory. You're going to fail many times when you try many new things. You can learn from your failure enough so that you eventually succeed. Okay, so how do you practice that? Play competitive games. Lose half of the time and learn how to be a resilient loser. Understand, just because you lost doesn't mean it was unfair or that you'll never arise to fight another day. You need to practice losing. Now, you also need to practice winning, but how do you do that? By playing. We know deep inside us that practicing losing and being gracious at it, being great at it, being polite and noble in the face of victory and defeat, there's a victory. If you have a child who plays a hell of a game and then loses and congratulates his opponent and means it, they didn't lose, they won. It is important to see your own losses as opportunities to learn and improve and to grow as well, rather than failing to examine them and just assuming that you've been the victim of something that must have been intrinsically unfair in some way. But you have to cultivate a more mature perspective in yourself before you can do that. And the Western world no longer values or encourages maturity. When you find yourself confronting these massive, seemingly insurmountable problems, you have to try to be aware, alert, and sensitive in approaching them. You have to attempt to be non-dramatic, intelligent, and precise in taking on a path that is unique to yourself. But first, you must truly understand that everyone suffers, and everyone is subject to some arbitrary and downright terrible limitations in their life. Sometimes that happens early in life, and sometimes it happens later on. But one way or another, it happens. You aren't the only one who has to contend with that. My body started to deteriorate on me when I was 3 years old. I started losing huge amounts of my vision when I was 15. And my brother died when I was 9 years old. Now, the downside to experiencing all of that hardship early on is that I never really got to be young. I never got to be healthy or had the luxury of being naive. I never got to party or to go off to college because there were always 3 more surgeries on the schedule that I had to get through before I could finally start my life. And that went on for years and years. I never got to be independent or even to fall in love just once in my life because my world was so small and I was so busy just trying to survive it. So I missed out. That is a fact. And I very much wish that some of those experiences had been a part of my life, even if it had only lasted for a short window of time. But then I look around at somebody like Christopher Reeves. He, on the other hand, knew what it was to be young and healthy. He had those experiences that I missed out on. He was quite literally Superman, for crying out loud. And he knew exactly what he was losing when he had all of that ripped away from him in the unimaginable blink of an eye. He lost his strength, his vitality, his very active lifestyle, the way he saw himself as a man, his love life, his whole identity. He went from being Superman to not being able to scratch his own nose or even breathe on his own. And he didn't even have the power to end his own life without somebody else's consent and help if it truly became unbearable for him. So yeah, I missed out on some of the things that he got to have out of life, but I wouldn't have traded places with him. And I know that for a fact because I was staring directly down the barrel of his diagnosis and his life when I went into my last surgery. There's really no point in comparing tragedies because they all suck. And that's the only part that is really important in the final analysis. After that, it's just about how you're going to cope with your own particular version of tragedy when it comes. And it's about figuring out that you can manage it once you have to. Weirdly enough, that can embolden you rather than terrify you. My mother always told me that the blessing in being forced to face your very worst fear is that you really aren't afraid in the same way after that. Now, the bad news is that in order to get there, you'll actually have to face your very worst fear, and that didn't sound like a very appealing trade-off to me. I very much hoped that I would be spared that trial by fire. I wasn't. And all I can say is that it turns out, as usual, my mama was right. And if you're lucky enough to face those insurmountable fears with someone else by your side, then it's about filling the void of the other person's vulnerabilities and meeting each other's needs, being there for each other. It's about fighting your battles together, back to back, as brothers in arms. That's how you remain close and how you remain fortified against whatever adversity eventually comes your way. Like Jordan ultimately concluded, that's the goal if you do it right. And then you're a bastion of strength for your kids when they have to battle with the harsh, brutal truth of reality, right? And then maybe there's nothing that can stop them. Yeah, it could be. Nothing including a pretty rough diagnosis. One of the oldest ideas that human beings have is that, the hero confronts the dragon and the dragon guards the treasure. And so one of the things you can always ask yourself is, if a big dragon comes your way, there's maybe a little more hero to be found, and God only knows what treasure is lurking there. Seriously, there's no end to the depth of that. Every dragon has its treasure, and sometimes the dragon is pretty damn overwhelming. But maybe there's a commiserate treasure if you're careful enough in your search. This little boy is already learning to exceed the expectations for him, just like I did growing up, and like many people do. There's a little boy exactly his same age that he is determined to beat at running, so he asked his dad to help him beat this other kid. His dad ran track in college, and so they started playfully training together. And it has actually improved their son's mobility a lot, as they have begun deliberately working on it. So like I said last week, don't assume that you know where the limits are based on doctors or even based on the way that you and others perceive common sense, without cautiously testing those limits to be sure first. Because I can't begin to tell you how many times I ended up figuring out ways to do things that I wasn't supposed to be able to do, and that your eyes would have told you would be impossible for me if you had seen me. People can do remarkable things if they direct a lot of attention towards working on it. That doesn't mean that every limit can be overcome with determination, but you would be surprised by how many can. 2 nights after his diagnosis, this little boy woke up in the middle of the night, and he told his mother that he had a dream. He said, "I was on our street with his brother, both on tricycles, and we were without our grown-up, the 2 of them alone, which they've never done. We saw you in the driveway, so we turned around to come back home. You handed me a powerful medicine that I only had to take one time, and then a giant eagle swooped down over the house. And he reached up and touched the feathers, and he tells me this, and then just knocks back out. And since he told me that, I've had that vision of that eagle over our house almost every night in my sleep. It's like I relive his dream. So maybe inspiring things lie ahead for this family, whatever path their journey may take. I certainly hope so. But to wrap things up, what lessons can you take away from these discussions on resilience? Teach your children to aim up. Establishing an inviting vision for your child of their future means that they can use the positive emotions that they get from pursuing that vision to become resilient in the face of life's difficulties. Stop answering questions your children aren't asking. Wait for your child to take the lead and then address their concerns as they arise. With that approach, an insurmountable problem becomes manageable. Don't lose yourself in your parenting. You have to understand that you are not doing your child a disservice by treating yourself in a manner that makes you the most able to maintain yourself as a source of security and comfort for them over the long run. You have to take care of yourself so that you can take care of others. And finally, there is no problem that you cannot confront. There's more to you than you think. There's more to your partner than you think. And there's more to your children than you might imagine. Discovering that can help you find the strength to maintain who you are when genuine trouble comes your way. And of course, there was one final homework assignment that was designed to help you boost your own resilience. Have the people in your household write about an episode of true difficulty for them where they exceeded their own expectations in coping with that situation. Have them write down the strategies that they used to overcome that challenge, and also have them describe the abilities that overcoming that challenge revealed in them. What did they learn about themselves through all of this? Then have them assess how those newly discovered abilities could be utilized again in the future. How can they use what they learned as they keep going forward? I think that this is an excellent exercise to go through with yourself as well. Next week, we're going to wrap up this series with a few of my final thoughts on many of the topics that we have covered. And the week after that, we are going to take a look at inspiration. We will consider what it is, why we need it, and how to maintain it. And that will serve as the jumping off point for my newest adventure in an undertaking that I very much hope that you will be willing to come along with me for that journey. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, I would ask you to please click the like and follow button because that is what makes these things successful. And I hope that you come back again next week. Until then, have a good week, my friends.